Hello pattern readers, and welcome to my second attempt at a Wheel of Time episode 4 video. My previous one faced copyright strike after copyright strike, even though I had been through many rounds of editing, doing all the things that I always do to avoid copyright strikes and claims, but I couldn't get by it. So, any case, this is going to be something a little different. In this video, I am going to focus on book-to-screen changes, different fan reactions to it, what my own thoughts were on book-to-screen changes in this episode specifically, and I'll also be bringing in some Easter eggs and foreshadowing that will be fun things for book readers to notice. So this video is going to contain book spoilers through Book 4, The Shadow Rising. The Logain cold open represents one of the major changes, which I think a lot of people were expecting going into the show, that Logain will have an expanded storyline and we will get to see the character on screen much more, since we basically don't see him at all in the Eye of the World. I don't think this has really been a controversial change, to be honest. I think fans were prepared for it and generally excited about the idea of Logain having a bigger role in the story. It's pretty easy to see why they want to do this, right? You're getting a first-hand look at a man who can channel. In this episode, especially, we're really coming to understand what that means. So right from the beginning, you have Logain, you hear that he hears voices. When he's not even channeling, he hears voices. And then when he is channeling, those hallucinations become visual as well. And we can see these figures that are talking to him and sort of taunting him and reminding him of things like betrayals and encouraging him to be great, be everything that he's supposed to be. What I really loved about this especially was that we see that Logain actually doesn't listen to them, and he chooses to show the King of Gildan mercy and to try to win him over to his side, and he is successful, and I think we can see why here. Logain really speaks as a man who truly believes in what he is saying and has good intentions. So that was a wonderful introduction to Logain. That just made me want to see more of this character. In terms of Easter eggs and foreshadowing in regards to this aspect of Logain, we have his hallucinations, both auditory and visual hallucinations. And actually later in the episode, when he's talking to Moiraine, he talks about how he believes the voices he hears are previous dragons, previous lives that he has lived if he's the Dragon Reborn. Now, this is foreshadowing for the way that Rand will actually experience madness due to the corruption on Saidin when he hears the voice of Lews Therin Telamon. And it will be interesting to see how the show handles that. We've basically been given two examples of male reactions to channeling madness. We have Logain, where his hallucinations are visual, but very clearly not something that we would take as real. He believes this is part of being the dragon, but I think he also knows that nobody else can see and hear these things. And then you had the man at the beginning of episode 1 who hallucinated another human being. He just believed there was another person with him that he was talking to and didn't realize that nobody else could see or hear this person. So just two kind of different examples, and it'll be curious to see how they might handle that with Rand when we get to that point. The other major source of book-to-screen changes in this episode stems from the decision to have Moiraine and Lan and Nynaeve, when they are separated from the others, meet up with the group of Aes Sedai who have captured Logain. And basically, pretty much everything that happens for the three of them in this episode stems from that change, and basically almost none of it is drawn directly from the books. And yet I don't think this is actually a very controversial choice for the fandom. I didn't see a lot of people who are really upset by that in this episode. And I think if we can point to a reason, if we look at what Moiraine and Lan and Nynaeve were doing during the stretch of the Eye of the World when they were separated from the other Emond's Fielders, they weren't really doing that much. You know, they were tracking the others. So we had some scenes of them sort of following along, and we get some hints of some of the dynamics that are going on there. Nynaeve not trusting Moiraine, Lan and Nynaeve starting to sort of develop this flirtation, and Nynaeve having the recognition that she can channel. Basically everything we got in this episode is instead of those few chapters from the books. And I think it's pretty fair to say that I don't think there's anything really specific from those book chapters that anybody's going to feel like, oh, we didn't get that. I feel like really disappointed that we didn't get that. So we can just appreciate these scenes for what they are, basically additional material for these characters so they don't kind of drop out of anything significant for an episode. And I can imagine that if they had chosen to keep those 3 characters just on their own in this episode instead, it would have really limited the options for exploring the dynamics between these characters. Because it's really hard to have potent one-on-one scenes between 2 of these characters when the 3rd character is right there. So it's more interesting to see the dynamics between 2 people in this case. So, how are we going to get that like progression and development in Lan and Nynaeve's relationship if Moiraine is right there? It's a limiting factor. And in terms of Nynaeve's attitude towards Aes Sedai, we get to explore it in a different way because she's meeting not just Moiraine, but other Aes Sedai. She's getting a sense that there are factions, and maybe Moiraine isn't as bad as she might have thought when she compares to some of the members of the Red Aja. But I think more importantly, by Nynaeve getting to know warders better. That's really the focus they took in this episode. She gets to know warders, Lan, of course, but other warders. And I think that is the opening for her to have a little bit of a different perspective on Aes Sedai and be a little bit more open to what they represent. And as the audience, new viewers are going to get the same. It's really not quite enough for us to understand what it means to be an Aes Sedai and what it means to be a warder if we just get that focus through Lan and Moiraine. So we get another kind of pretty fully fleshed out warder Aes Sedai relationship through Stepan and Karenni. And we get to explore a dynamic of that relationship that we don't get to explore at this point with Lan and Moiraine. And it gives more motivation and layers to their characters if we know what happens to a warder when his Aes Sedai is killed. And this is very relevant for Moiraine because she is putting herself in danger. Through her actions, through her intention, she is drawing the Shadow's attention to her. So she does have reason to be worried about herself and, more importantly, to worry about Lan. And we're getting a good introduction and glimpse into now 3 of the Ajas, not just blues, who we understand through Moiraine, but greens and reds as well. So 3 very important factions we are getting some different examples of. And in the case of the greens, we kind of have 2 solid examples, Karenni and Alana. And in the reds, we really just have Liandrin. But all 3 very interesting characters with really dynamic portrayals. So it is opening up that world of the Aes Sedai much more to the audience at this point than they would get by following the script of The Eye of the World more exactly. And I really love the individual scenes we got in this episode between Moiraine and Lan, where we get to see Moiraine with her guard down a little bit, talking to Lan about how they lost these people that they have been seeking for 20 years. He may feel guilty about that, but she is making it clear that wherever one of them has a failure, it's both of them, that they're in this 100% together. And then the other, really lovely little insight that when Lan has a drink, Moiraine gets emotional. It's really helping us to understand what this bond entails, what it really means for these 2 characters. And then for Nynaeve and Lan, we're really moving their relationship forward. In episode 3, we got some wonderful, wonderful moments of the sort of initial conflict between them, that sort of crackle that's in their relationship. And here, we're getting to look at the 2 of them from a very different angle, where we start to see more of what they have in common. The way that as a warder and Nynaeve as a wisdom, they both really dedicate their lives to protecting others. And that is something that they have common ground on. And they're starting to develop trust. So when Lan makes it clear that he promised to help Nynaeve find her friends, she believes him. That means something to her. So they've come some distance there. And then, of course, she's developing, an interest in him. And even from this little, detail that they've added in there about Alana and her 2 warders being in a throuple, that could be seen as just, well, it's sort of like helping us understand, like, what's going on with the Green Aja? How are things like that looked at in this world? But it also goes beyond that because Nynaeve, you can see her reacting to that in a way where it's making her wonder, like, what's going on with Lan and Moiraine? Is there something there? So that was a brilliant little moment. And she wants to know more about him. When she sees him praying, she's asking about it and she's opening up to him. And so just really wonderful scenes between the 2 of them. And in 2 episodes, their relationship has moved so much further. They've given us so much more to be invested in and to root for than we ever got in the book development of them falling in love. And then in that final section of the episode where we see the climax of this group, what they're facing, of course, we get a battle, and that shows us more of what it means for Aes Sedai and warders to fight and using the one power in that way. But most importantly, we get this huge moment for Nynaeve. This isn't just Moiraine telling her that she can channel. This is showing everyone that she can channel. And it's done in a way that's really perfect for her character, right? She is put in a situation where she sees all of these people hurt and dying around her. And we who know her as a character know that she can't just sit by when she sees something like that. And especially Lan, because she's now starting to see him as one of her own people. And that is enough to give her this burst of instinctive healing that's just flowing out of her because she can't help it. And I think that is very fitting for her character in such a memorable way for us to learn that Nynaeve can channel. We can learn what her talent is and how strong she is, and in a way that the audience is never going to forget. I mean, how could you argue with something like that? What a brilliant moment. And it works for the ongoing mystery that they're building in of who is the Dragon Reborn. I'm sure there were a lot of new viewers who at the end of this episode were like, oh, it's her. It's got to be her. If they weren't thinking Matt in this episode. More on that. But, and then the very last thing that we also get from this is Logain being gentled. And by the point that happens, we've seen him. We saw how at the beginning, he is a good man. He is someone who is trying to do the right thing. He is trying to help the world. He believes that he can. And, and we see that in the way he talks to the King of Gildan, and also the way he talks to Moiraine when they get a moment, that he believes this. He believes that he can do good in the world. And then to have all of that ripped away and to see the look on his face. I mean, first of all, he's just had to see another channeler be the raging sun that he thought he could be. And then he gets all of his power ripped away from him. It's heartbreaking. And that is another unforgettable moment that we got. All of this stemming from the decision to include Logain as a character and to bring these characters together in a group for this episode. Talking about Perrin and Egwene in this episode is pretty easy, so I'm going to actually do that here in the middle, because I think if of any of the three, plot lines that we're following in this episode, this is the one that is basically unchanged. So the differences are, we have not met Elias. We don't have Elias in the story yet. So we know something is going on with Perrin in regards to the wolves, although that is not as big a deal in this episode as in some other ones. But we don't really, if you're a new audience, you don't really know what is happening. So that is, again, it's adding to the mystery of, what is going on with these different characters, who could be the Dragon Reborn. And it certainly makes it more unsettling for Perrin to not only be going through these changes, but to not even really know what's going on. So there's that difference. But otherwise, they do travel with the Tinkers for a while, and Perrin being introduced to the Way of the Leaf is very significant in the books. And I think it's especially significant here for him in this episode because of the changes they made in episode 1, the trauma that Perrin is dealing with. And, his conversation with Isla really, I think he really needs to hear these things, needs to begin to explore these things and hear some of the things that she's saying to him. So that was a very powerful encounter for him. It is so in the books, and we see that here. And then the other bit of difference here is the dynamic between Egwene and Aram. In the books, you kind of get the sense that he's maybe a little pushy when it comes to his flirting. I mean, I don't know how accurate that is. That's from Perrin's perspective, which is a little skewed in the book. But that's the impression that we get as readers, is that maybe Aram is being a little pushy in his flirtation with Egwene, and he's kind of got a little bit more of like a chip on his shoulder too. Here in the show, he's really charming. Daryl McCormack is doing a wonderful job with this character. And I like this because it really, I think, sets things up better for his later arc in the books. There's more to him, he isn't fully a believer in the Way of the Leaf. And I think they're establishing that here. He still enjoys the experience of being a part of this group of people. It's just, it's not everything to him, and he doesn't fully buy into the strong beliefs that some people have, and that may be a little bit alienating, but he still has some wonderful things about him. And I think getting to know and like him as a character before he goes on a different journey, some parts of which might be harder for people to relate to him in, is a good thing. When it comes to him and Egwene, I think it was a good choice to have him sense that she is in love with somebody else, and to like directly address that. He might be attracted to her, he might want to flirt with her, but he isn't going to be pushy with a woman who clearly has her heart somewhere else, you know. So they actually had a lovely conversation instead. So I've just been enjoying these scenes all around, and I don't think there are any major changes here or things that would be upsetting to fans. I'm sure some people do miss Elias, but hopefully we will still get him eventually, and they will bring him into the story when it makes the most sense for Perrin's character. There's also certainly some foreshadowing with Aram when he talks to Egwene about the idea that Tinkers, when they turn 20, will leave the wagons for a while and make sure that the way of the leaf is really the life that they would choose. And he talks about what some of them do. Most of them come back, but some of them don't. And there's certainly foreshadowing for him. But also I found that when he was talking about the wind sometimes blowing the leaf away from the tree, he could be talking about himself. That does happen for him. But also I think it happens for Egwene. The wind is not going to bring her journey back home as she perhaps thinks it will. She's going to go off in other directions. Also, I don't know if you noticed this, but to me, I thought in a lot of scenes, Aram's clothing was not as colorful as a lot of the other Tuatha'an. And so that might be a sort of visual signifier that tells us, along with the dialogue, that he hasn't fully bought into the way of the leaf. And then I wondered about Egwene being so sure that Rand wasn't dead when Aram asked her. And the thing that occurred to me was, if she is Ta'Viren also in this turning of the wheel, then perhaps it's through that Ta'Viren connection that is starting to come into play that she can be so sure that Rand is not dead. Now, Mat and Rand's arc in the past couple of episodes has also changed pretty significantly compared to what it is in the books. But it's not so much that different elements are added in. It's really just that they had to find a way to streamline and condense the major elements from that section of the book. So if you think about what we have, you know, they visit a lot of inns. They encounter a number of dark friends. They are brought to farms. They go traveling with farmers, either on their farm or in a cart. They encounter a lot of farmers. And of course, there's Tom. And if we look at how they have, you know, condensed these elements into these past two episodes, we do get all of those things. And of course, we get Rand and Mat themselves, who are struggling with not knowing where their next meal is going to come from, and Mat starting to feel the effects of the dagger. So all of those elements from that part of their journey are in there. We even have, although this was in episode 3, not this one, a little bit of what appears to be Rand channeling. All the elements are there. They've streamlined and condensed it into like 2 major locations. So in episode 3, it was Breen Spring, and we had Dana sort of standing in for all the dark friend characters that they encountered. And then in this episode, we have the Grinwells, which are one of the names that people do remember from that stretch of their journey. So it kind of makes sense that they've included these, and it gets us a farmer. And we're still with Tom, so we're still developing the Tom aspect of that story. And I think if we just look at what's here and we understand the limitations of, we had to do this journey in as few locations as possible. And we want the scenes that we have for these characters to actually be meaningful. We don't want to do like quick, you know, rush through montage scenes of everything they go through. We want their scenes to actually have meaning and impact. I think they did a wonderful job, because it just the way that in episode 3, the Breen Spring scenes just worked. I feel the same way about the Grinwell scenes in this episode. They just work. They work especially because we have that scene between Mat and the little girl. And this made a lot of sense if we consider his relationship with his sisters in the show, that this little girl would be someone who would bring out the Mat that is underneath everything that's going on with the dagger. And that little bond that they forge there, it gives us a connection to this family. And it shows us, it kind of reminds us who Mat is, because we've seen it at the beginning, but he's starting to feel the effects of the dagger. We're starting to wonder, I mean, you know, if you haven't read the books, how likable is this guy after all? Was I maybe wrong about him? So you see that softness come out in him again in that scene, which was beautifully acted with both of them. We get another lovely scene between Rand and Tom, where we hear some of Tom's history, which is very relevant. It's not always that you have a scene where a character is telling a story about their past and it really is riveting, but it is because Tom and the actor is a wonderful storyteller, and because it is completely relevant to what is happening here. And I think they've done a good job of setting up the idea that Matt might be channeling. It really does make sense. Even though they're going, very visual with how they're adapting the dagger effects, and that kind of surprised me a little bit. I still think it might be hard for new viewers to totally understand what's happening here. And they have downplayed the dagger itself as much as they can. It's still there. You see him kind of holding it under his coat and things like that. But I think with Tom's explanation for what's happening here for new viewers, that is a very plausible explanation. And I think that is a suitable red herring here. And you get to start to see Rand processing all of that, which gives you wonderful bits of foreshadowing for what is actually going to be happening with Rand. And then the culmination is finding Matt holding that dagger, pointing it up, and he clearly is not really aware of what he is doing at this point. It seems as though the dagger has drawn him to the Fade, and that makes sense from what we know of how these two different types of evil work with each other. There's sort of an attraction and a repelling at the same time. And it may very well be that is how the Fade tracked them there because of the dagger. Wow. That scene where you first see the Grinwells and you don't see the Fade yet, it does have us, even though we know Matt and we know how the dagger works and how it doesn't work, it gets you wondering, like, did he do this? It was very effective. And then the Fade appears, and I mean, who would have thought that I would ever be like, oh, good, thank the light, there's a Fade. That's nuts. But that's what happened. So these were probably the most effective, horror sequences in the show so far. Really well done. And we're getting to see Tom battle a Fade, which we knew was a fate that was in store for him, and the horror for Matt as he is starting to come back to himself. And when he actually sees the little girl who the Fade has killed as he and Rand are fleeing, and that last shot of the little girl's doll. I mean, it's all just very, very effective. So, I mean, I can't fault anything that they've done here. Yes, they had to cut out some things. They had to streamline it a lot, but it really makes sense. And the scenes that we got in both episode 3 and episode 4 for Rand and Matt and Tom were very moving and powerful. So I'm happy with it. I'm also pretty sure that Rand's Ta'veren nature was at work when he was talking to Master Grinwell and convincing him to let them stay on the farm. He just seemed to know the right way to approach it and the right things to say to get the man to disarm. And then we have the fact that Matt's horse was so jumpy. And from what Tom says, we can look at that as, oh, maybe that's because Matt can channel. But as book readers, I think we know that it's much more likely to do with the dagger that Matt carries. I've seen some people suggesting it could be due to Rand, but I'm not sure that makes a whole lot of sense since Rand's horse is seemingly fine. And then there's the little girl's Brigitte doll, who she says watches over her when everyone is asleep. And I love that little detail because, as we know, the real Brigitte is in the world of dreams. And so it's quite possible that she could watch over the little girl if she should happen to wander in to tell her on Riyadh. So overall, this was a top-notch episode. I think generally very well received in the fandom, and I didn't see as much controversy in this episode over book-to-screen changes. So this was kind of, in some ways, easier to talk about. But this will be interesting to get into for the next episode, episode 5, as I will do one of these types of videos for that as well, where I break down the book-to-screen changes, talks about pros and cons of them, and then include things like foreshadowing and Easter eggs as well. That one's going to be a little bit trickier because I think that one is a little bit more divisive. People really like the episode, but the changes are such that maybe we did miss out on some things that people might have been looking forward to. So that makes it a little bit harder. But I am looking forward to talking about that. So for now, let me know your thoughts in the comments on these book-to-screen changes. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss my other videos. And until next time, keep your loins girded, my friends.